Alright guys, welcome to the updated EXP lane tier list for January 2025. On the screen right now is the community solo queue EXP lane tier list. I asked my community to vote on what tier they believe each hero should be in, and this is what they came up with. There were 385 participants that voted on this tier list. So this tier list is what they came up with. You can see that there are 5 tiers. I will explain, 6 tiers. I will explain what each tier means in a bit. So before we get into the tier list fully, I need to get some disclaimers and explanations out of the way. The problem with a tier list is that a lot of info gets lost if you just look at the tier list as a whole like that. For example, if you look at the tier list right now, Gatot is first place, but there are situations when Hilda, who is in second place, can be more optimal than Gatot, or even like, let's say, Sun. So don't just judge it on where they are placed. There are some situations that a hero that is placed higher can be considered better in certain situations. So what I want to say is that a high place on the list doesn't mean that the hero always wins every game, and a low place on the list doesn't mean that the hero always loses every game. You gotta take that into account when you are looking at the tier list. Secondly, I'm evaluating each hero based on their merits, not on how bad random players play it. So for example, heroes like Zilong, Elders, Dyrov tend to have a bad reputation of having players that play them badly. So a lot of people will put Zilong, Elders, Dyrov at the bottom of the tier list just because they have a bad reputation, and it can artificially adjust the perception of their actual strength. Thirdly, this is a solo queue tier list. So this is purely based on what I think each hero's solo queue performance is. Professional games are very different and are the absolute peak of coordinated play. So it should not affect how a hero is placed in such a list, because a professional game is way different from a solo queue rank game. Lastly, a tier list is just a general overview of how a hero performs. So somebody else can have a totally different tier list based on their own individual playstyle and their own mastery of the hero. For example, somebody who has a more aggressive playstyle would prefer having like Arlot in a meta tier, or maybe like Benedetta in a meta tier. And somebody likes to play tanky EXPs will probably like put Hylos at the top or Hilda at the top. So those are all my disclaimers out of the way. I would like to say some of the key factors that I would value the heroes higher than others in a solo queue game. So for EXP laners, early game wave clear speed is very important. An EXP lane would function almost like a second roamer. So during the wave, fast is important, especially in the early game. Second is the solo ability of the hero. So how good is that hero able to survive on his own, especially when ganked, or he's at least able to trade back if he's ganked. And thirdly, there should be a utility damage balance for a hero to be good in solo. What I mean by utility balance is that there is enough CC and there's also enough damage. So if you just do a lot of damage, you need to have some insane damage to be very good. If you do a lot of CC, you need to have some insane CC to be very good. But it's best if you have both utility and damage at the same time, because in solo, teammates are unreliable, so you need some of both. So the best EXP laners tend to combine both damage and utility. Okay, let's go to my tier list. So let me explain how I define each tier first. The meta tier is, of course, the top tier. The heroes that are put in this meta tier are very strong in what they do. They are usually priority banned or picked in the current meta. But that said, you should not just ban them blindly in any case, because you should probably just look at what you are picking and then ban accordingly. Even though they are the top of the meta, they are still not completely invincible, but they have less weaknesses compared to other heroes. That's why they are the top, because there are less situations that they are bad, and there are more situations that are good. Mostly solid heroes are strong and can compete with the meta heroes, but they have more weaknesses than the meta heroes. Situational heroes can be as strong as meta heroes, but only in the right situations. You will see that in the situational heroes, there will be heroes that seem very strong, but probably in only the right situations. So their strength can vary wildly based on the situation. Average heroes are mostly average. That's why they are in the average tier. Even in situations which favors them, they are typically outclassed by the top 2 tiers. That's why they are in average. And of course, usually bad heroes are just usually bad and outclassed by everything else that is above them. They can have their shining moments if the enemy is bad enough, or you have some kind of insane mastery on the hero, but usually they will not be as good as whatever is above. Okay, so let's start with the tank list. I'm just gonna put all the tanks in the tank list first. The tanks, they have their own special category because they typically don't have consistent damage and some have really bad wave clear, but they offers more tankiness and more impactful CC than most of the other heroes on the list. So if your team has a severe lack of CC or frontline ability, they can be very good, especially if you really need a counter pick. For example, can pick Arkai against an enemy 1-1 Fanny. It can be a good pick, but since it's a solo kill list, right, EXP laner loses a lot of value if you don't combine utility and damage. So having the lack of damage kind of hurts you as a solo kill EXP laner because you can't always rely on your team to do the damage. This is the problem with the tanks. That's why I put them in a special category, because they are probably much better if you play in a squad and your team needs another tank. Let's talk about the heroes that are usually bad, especially in this current meta. So we are starting off with Belmont. So Belmont usually has good wave clear and sustain in lane, but the problem is that he doesn't really offer much else other than that. He has no utility, he has no stuns, he has like a slight knockback with his skill 1, and that's it. His damage is mostly weak to average at best, and he really needs to snowball to have a good game. Like if you don't snowball with Belmont, right, it's likely that you're gonna have a very bad game, and it's really hard to snowball against nearly everything else on this list. It's gonna take a really bad enemy for you to snowball on Belmont. So Belmont is just bad right now. So the next two, I have two heroes together as they have similar points, so I will talk about them both in tandem. We have Long and Elders. So for Zilong and Elders, they both have good damage when they get their items, but they both fall off really hard if they not equal on farm with the enemy. So as long as you have lower farm than the enemy, you're just gonna have a bad game. So they really want to snowball. If you don't snowball, it's gonna be pretty much just stay in your lane and farm. It's the same problem as Belmont. You're gonna really have a hard time to snowball against the current meta, and they don't offer anything if they are not farm. They are basically useless, just like Belmont, if you are not farm, because the only thing they really offer is just damage. Even though Zilong got a buff to his sustain and he improved his early 1v1, his sustain still comes from landing his basic attacks. So his sustain still has a lot of risk involved, and he acts like an assassin even when he's on level on farm. So if the team is behind, there's nothing to assassinate. If your team is losing, they can't really do the damage to get them low enough for you to go in. You're doing nothing. And even when he gets the farm, right, he's still too squishy. But there will definitely be shining moments for Zilong, like he gets like a savage or he split push into the base by himself. But these are the cases that are kinda rare. I think people will put Zilong higher because they will remember getting split push by Zilong. But I think those cases are very much rare. For Elders, right, he doesn't have much sustain, but it's more tanky since he can go to tank build. He's slightly better than Zilong playing from behind because his ult at least can offer vision and also has global teleport. But overall, he still isn't that much better than Zilong. Because for EXP lane, right, the first big fight is the EXP lane side of the map, because the first turtle spawns in EXP. To have a low impact early game is a big problem for EXP laner, especially if you offer almost nothing in that first fight. So next, I have 5 heroes together. Leomord, Aulus, Yin, Julian, and Alice. Okay, so I will discuss these 5 heroes together, as these 5 heroes are more suitable to jungle than to play in EXP. Why these 5 are in the usually bad? Because they have below average early sustain, they have below average early wave clear. All 5 of them actually have good damage when they have items, so they really want to snowball to have a good game, similar to Elders, Zilong and Belmont. But it will be very hard to snowball, especially against the current meta. All 5 of them are much more suitable to jungle to get the more consistent farm, and they are also more suitable for ganking squishy targets. You know, you're not really gonna get a squishy target in EXP lane, especially in the current meta. They also want to gank by surprise. So these 5 heroes, I would say, would highly prefer to be in jungle. Yeah, so being in lane is not playing to their strengths at all. Okay, so these are all my usually bad heroes. The very first average hero is Sylvana. So Sylvana has very average wave clear with skill 2. I mean, I played Sylvana enough to know that her wave clear isn't that great. Her early sustain is also not that good. Without her ult, without concentrated energy, her early sustain is not that good. So you kinda don't want to get hit that much, but you kinda still have to get hit if you go against meta EXP laners. So she would really need to land her out to have an impact in team fight. Other than that, she doesn't really have a good way to enter a team fight other than just landing the out. But the thing is that the out isn't exactly easy to land. There's a slight delay and the AoE isn't that big. I would say it's not easy to play Sylvana right now. I would say that Sylvana is actually probably like a weaker version of Terizla. She has less AoE, less sustain, less tankiness, roughly equal damage, maybe even less damage. So she's just like a weaker magic version of Terizla. So the next one I have is Bane. The thing about Bane is that he has poor early wave clear if you can't get into range for the passive. So his wave clear, you're just gonna stand at the corner and just shoot your skill 1 and skill 2, but it doesn't really clear the wave that well. So you're just hiding away most of the time. He will be zoned out most of the time because his sustain isn't that good. He's not that tanky. Yeah, Bane is just not that great in EXP in the laning phase especially. But the first total fight, his out can have a good impact in that early fight. But he's not much use in that early fight other than that since his damage is kinda bad early. There are much better options than Bane. So he's pretty average in that sense. Next I have Uranus. Uranus, actually his early sustain isn't that insane and he can be bursted if you're not careful with how you do it. Especially if you don't monitor your stacks, you can be bursted quite fast. If you play against a poke enemy, you probably can sustain quite well, but if you face burst, you're in trouble if you don't monitor your stacks. Also, he falls off really hard. He doesn't have any utility besides blowing the enemies. Uranus would really want to snowball hard and end the game early because his value really falls off a cliff if the enemies recover from all that early game harassing that you did. His value really falls off because he can be bursted in the late game. He's not that tanky in the late game because he really relies that much on sustain. And then when the enemies get all the anti-heal items and their damage is a lot higher, you can be bursted down and then you lose a lot of value because you have practically no hard CC at all. Okay, so the next one I have is Barats. So Barats is one of those heroes that is a lot better in a squad, not in solo queue. So Barats has good early wave clear and he's tanky enough not to have the sustain. His out is very high impact. It's not easy to consistently land without flicker. The thing is that he has a very obvious playstyle. It's similar to Martis in that he just walks up and it's very obvious what he's supposed to do. For his passive, right, like to get bigger, right, he needs to have stacks. And the stacks can be a bit hard to get in solo, especially with everyone clearing minions and creeps everywhere. If you play solo, you will know that every player is just gonna clear the wave when they see it. They're not gonna save the wave for you. They're not gonna save a jungle creep for you to stack. They're just gonna clear it and then you have to find the stack somewhere. There can be a lot of times that when you're playing Barats, you are just a mini dinosaur. You're not the T-Rex. You're literally just a Velociraptor. So this is one of the big problems with playing Barats in solo. Yeah, if you don't have flicker, you might not be landing your out that much as a EXP Barats. So I find that Barats is kinda inconsistent in solo queue. Okay, next one I have Guinevere. Guinevere has below average wave clear early. The reason is that her wave clear would have been abysmal if she doesn't have a range skill 1. Her early sustain comes from her passive, which is melee range. So you can say that her sustain isn't that great because it puts her at risk. Actually, Guinevere doesn't really have great utility because her entire kit is just locked behind hitting her skill 2. If you miss your skill 2, right, you're almost useless and it has a long cooldown. And the skill 2 isn't that easy to land because of the delay and the small hitbox. And the thing is that skill 2 can be hard countered by Purify. You're kinda screwed if the enemy takes Purify. But the good thing about Guinevere is that if the enemy doesn't take Purify and they really are bad at dodging that skill 2, right, you can have very high kill pressure with your combo. And also, Guinevere falls off pretty hard if you don't keep up in farm because you're not gonna do any damage. So the next hero is Marsha. I like to play Marsha, but the thing is that Marsha's early game kinda sucks. She is gonna be pinned back in the lane most of the time. She has poor wave clear. Her sustain is below average. She relies a lot on that healing, but it's not easy to get the stacks to heal up if you are behind because you get zoned out from even hitting anything to get the stacks. The thing about Marsha is that she has quite amazing late game one-shot potential and her HP % damage. She's able to even one-shot some of the semi-tanks. This is one thing that Marsha has going for her. She can flicker combo to one-shot most of the squishies if they don't have Wind of Nature. So this is the one good thing about Marsha. But as I said, the biggest issue she has is that really bad early games. And throughout the game, her wave clear is not good. Okay, so next hero. Next hero I have Martis. So Martis is another one of those that is more suitable for jungle. So although he has decent wave clear in lane, but his sustain is kind of weak because he doesn't have any healing. Unless you take Fighter Emblem and Blood Festival, but even then his sustain is still kind of weak. And the thing about Martis is that similar to Baratz, he's very obvious in what he wants to do. His playstyle is extremely obvious because he doesn't really have any, dash or anything. Okay, he has a dash, but his gap closing tool is just locked behind the ult, and you want to use the ult when the enemies are already dying, not when you start and the engage. So in a way, he doesn't have the dash. So the next one I have is Dairoth. So after the recent changes to Dairoth, right now he has weaker burst but more sustain. But I don't think the extra sustain is actually that great. I think he's actually more useful to be a one-shot threat. The thing is that he still has his uses versus tanky EXP, but due to his weaker burst, especially the defense threat being nerfed, he's not as good as before, in my opinion. So despite the higher sustain, I don't think he's as good as before. I would even put Dairoth in mostly solid last time, but right now I think he's just average. Since he has no utility besides slow effects from his skill 2 and skill 1, he will fall far behind if you don't snowball, and it's really harder to play Dairoth now since his burst was nerfed. But I think the way to buff his late game is not give him more sustain. I think the way to buff his late game is actually to make him more tanky, either like give him more HP or give him more defense. So I think right now Dairoth is merely average. Next one I have Alucard. So the thing about his ult is that every time you upgrade the ult, it gives you 10% free lifesteal. At level 12, when you upgrade the ult to level 3, you get 30 free lifesteal stats. So he can get up to 30 free hybrid defense if you have Rose Gold just by upgrading his ult. But I think Alucard still has the same issues that he already had playing in EXP, despite the Rose Gold upgrade that he had. Even though he had 30 extra hybrid defense, but I don't think it really did extremely a lot for him. Yeah, he still has the same issues that he already had playing in EXP. He has no utility aside from the slow from the ult. So he really wants to snowball, because if you reach late game, your utility is basically nothing. But I will have to say that his snowball is quite good. He's like a physical Harif. Once you get the snowball going, your sustain is pretty insane. You're almost unkillable with good damage, and if you can get the snowball going, you can carry a team on your own. But the thing is that in EXP, it's hard for Alucard to carry from EXP. Okay, next one I have is Paquito. I really like to play Paquito because Paquito is very mobile. It's fun and the sound effects are nice. But anyway, Paquito has pretty poor early sustain. He has good wave clear though, and he has high mobility, but he's very squishy. Kind of counteracted by his high mobility though, because you can get out most of the time if you save your skill 2 to get out. He has good damage with the damage build, but that makes him very squishy. Also similar to Masha, he can flicker combo one-shot squishies in late game, so that's a good thing for him. If you go tank build on Paquito, right, his damage really falls off a lot, and he's still not very tanky anyway if you go tank build, so you kind of just want to go almost full damage on him. But one thing is that due to his high mobility, right, he can split push quite decently. The next two are quite close to being mostly solid or situational. Like they are close to not being average, but overall I would think they are average in a way. Okay, so the next one is Lapu. I have to say that I really like to play Lapu, so I really don't want to put him average, but playing Lapu right now feels very average. So what Lapu has is that he has decent sustain and wave clear. He can affect the first turtle fight very well because his level 4 with his ult is fantastic. But the thing is, he doesn't do much without ult. But also his ult has relatively low cooldown, especially if you build the cooldown reduction build. But the cooldown reduction build falls off a lot in late game because the cooldown reduction build lacks tankiness. So in a way, if you don't build the cooldown reduction build, his ult cooldown is a bit longer, but he gets a bit more tankiness. But you kind of want to build the cooldown reduction build. When you play Lapu, right, I find that Lapu gets bursted quite fast in late game, especially since he doesn't really have much stun. So if you get bursted, right, you practically already are useless because you didn't even do any stuns or anything. So kinda you want to impact the game during the early to mid, because that's where you are most impactful. When he's not easily bursted yet, your ult still has that high impact. Also, one thing is that Lapu used to be super good against Faramis. Right now Faramis is not in the meta anymore, at least in solo queue. Okay, next one, Yuzhong. Sadly, I was always playing Yuzhong last time, but the thing is that he has also fallen off similar to Lapu. Yuzhong and Lapu have very similar points. They have decent wave clear, they have decent sustain, they have high impact level 4 ults, but they don't do much without the ult. So they both do a lot of their work in the early to mid. Similar to Lapu, they are bursted late game. So For Yu Zhong, right, you usually want to enter the team fight in your out. When you fly in, right, in the late game, right, you are going to be bursted down so fast just by flying in. I kind of think that if they buff, maybe like make him more tanky in his dragon form, like when he's flying in, it could actually make him a lot more viable. Right now, it feels like Yu Zhong's impact in late game doesn't feel that strong anymore because he gets gunned down so hard before he even starts doing anything. To be honest, I would really love to put Lapu and Yu Zhong higher, but I feel their performance right now isn't that strong anymore compared to the other heroes here. Okay, so this is basically all the heroes in average. So I start with Esmeralda. So Esmeralda is excellent when there's a lot of enemy shielding. In fact, Esmeralda is one of those that is very smooth to play because he can just run around and keep hitting, which I enjoy. But otherwise, if the enemy doesn't really have a lot of shielding, she's pretty average and kind of squishy if she doesn't get items. Her mobility is quite good, but she also lacks a heavy crowd control. Yeah, Esmeralda is kind of situational because she's really good if only when you're facing a lot of shielding. But to be honest, even when there's a lot of shielding, sometimes she can sometimes even feel average. So that's why she's like the lowest part of situational, because even in the right situations, she can feel kind of weak. Okay, so the next one actually I have Suyo. Suyo is another one of those heroes that is a lot more suitable to jungle, but he's still okay in EXP. Like not okay, but he can be considered decent in EXP, like good to decent. The good thing about Suyo is he has good early wave clear and sustain with his skill 2. He will be fine during the early game, and he can also go for a hybrid build and still be relatively tanky. So he can go like Blade of Despair and maybe like Hunter Strike or something, or X. He can still be quite tanky. So even though you build some damage items, because of his damage reduction passive, he will still be relatively tanky. But the thing is that he still lacks crowd control aside from his enhanced skill 1. It's difficult to say that he is consistently good in EXP because he lacks utility. So Suyo is situational in the sense that he would be good mostly when your team already has a good amount of CC. And I guess he has decent split push with his skill 1 and out being able to dash. Next one I have is Tamus. So Tamus is one of those that has great early game. He probably has one of the best early game. So he really wants to snowball since his early game is so good. But the thing about Tamus is he lacks heavy crowd control and he starts falling behind quite a bit in late game. He's kind of situational in that you really kind of want to play Tamus in a more early game lineup that can really abuse his early game. Also, he doesn't really have a great gap closing dash and is probably better against low mobility lineups. The thing that separates Tamus from all the other snowballing average heroes is probably that his early game is really that good. He's better than them. So if you get a good snowball going on Tamus, right, you can really end the game quite quick. But there are still better early gamers than Tamus, which yeah, they are coming up soon. The next one I have is Jawhead. Jawhead is one of those that has a good early. But the thing about Jawhead that is slightly better than Tamus is that he has a very good CC with the skill 2. So he does have a bit more utility than Tamus. Even if you have a not so good early, you still have some usage out of him. So Jawhead with his skill 1 missiles, right, he has good early wave clear. But the thing is Jawhead lacks some sustain. He can generate shield with the skill 2, but that's not really sustain, right? His strong early game will allow you to get by without sustain though, because I think most heroes wouldn't want to walk up to a Jawhead with the missiles on, especially at level 1. So he can get by without having that sustain. His auto lock ulti and toss combo is quite deadly. Once you hit level 4, even with a tank build, you're probably gonna one-shot almost any jungler except the tanks. So that's good for him. And he can kind of choose between playing tank or damage, depending on what you need, because I think both will work quite well. One thing about Jawhead though is that he single target, which is a problem when you get to around late game, when there are too many threats to deal with. For example, in early game, you can just focus on jungle, right? Because you want to stop them from retreating or you want to invade their jungle or whatever. But in the late game, when the mages and the marksmen start dealing too much damage, your single targetness is gonna start being one of a problem. I would say Jawhead is situational in the case that since he is more of like an early gamer. That's why I have Alpha. Alpha is one of those that I don't really like in EXP because he's so much better in jungle. But although saying that, he's still quite good in EXP in certain situations. So Alpha has decent early wave clear, decent early sustain. But the thing is that his utility is mostly about landing a good ultimate against multiple targets. But the thing is that it's not easy to land a good multi-target ultimate because his ult has a very narrow hitbox. You're not gonna land a lot of good ultimates because his ult is so difficult to get that hitbox correctly into multiple targets. So his utility is really locked behind that, because other than that, what other things are you gonna do other than just walking up and skill 1, skill 2? He's very good against low mobility tanky targets because he has the true damage with his passive. Against such targets, he's very good and he can chase them effectively because they don't have much mobility. But he still needs some farm to have enough sustain and damage. So he can fall behind quite hard if your team goes behind in farm. You don't have enough sustain and damage for anything. Yeah, so situational in the sense that he's not great against high mobility lineups because it's gonna be really hard to land any good outs or even get in range. But he's really good against low mobility tanky lineups. Okay, so next one I have Argus. I think a lot of people probably are wondering where I'm gonna put Argus because Argus just got a major revamp, but I think Argus is still quite situational. Let me explain. Even after his revamp, right, his early game actually got weaker after the revamp because they nerfed his skill 2 in exchange for that weaker early game, which to be honest, he wanted a better early game, but his out is disgustingly long. If you played Mobile Legends recently and played against Argus, right, you're gonna know how long that stupid ultimate is. Even though his out is very long right now, right, which is powerful, to be honest, it's quite powerful. The problem is that enemies still can escape him from him. Yeah, so even with the longer ultimate, he still suffers from the same problems, but now with a weaker early game. Yeah, so it's even harder to reach late game now than before. But against a low mobility lineup, he has great potential to solo in solo queue. Because against a low mobility lineup, you can quite easily 1v2 to 1v3, even facing quite a bit of CC. Unless, of course, they CC chain you perfectly, which is not that common in solo queue at least. So this is the thing about Argus. If you survive that early to mid, right, you are a complete monster in late game against a low mobility lineup. The developers wanted Argus to be more team fight, so his solo potential is kind of weakened. But his split push potential is still there, even though they greatly nerfed it since you cannot regen in his out from the tower hits anymore. So Argus for me is situational in the sense that he is really one of the best if there is a low mobility lineup for a solo queue player. Next one I have Freya. So Freya is similar to Tamus in that snowball potential, but he has even better snowball potential. So probably I would say Freya probably has the strongest snowball potential on this list. But the thing is that she probably is quite average most of the time. But I put her in a situational since she probably has the best results from snowballing, probably aside from Sun. So because of that, I would put her situational because in the situation that she snowballs, it's an unstoppable snowball almost. She's better than Argus because of her much stronger early game, which as you know for EXP you probably want stronger early game than a strong late game. So Freya is slightly ahead of Argus because of that. She's very strong, like extremely strong when the enemy EXP is weak. Yeah, and you're gonna end the game before 9 minutes just by pushing. But generally Freya will suffer against most EXP above her in this list. If she falls behind, right, it's really difficult to play Freya. Okay, so next one I have X-Block. So for me, X-Block is a very situational pick. Currently in the high range meta, right, with Malefic Gun, he's not that great because his Firaga armor gets poked down very easily. That's it. He has a solid early clear, decent sustain, and similar to Alpha, does very good against low mobility tanky lineups. He does have the situations that he's good in, but he's also quite weak in early game and needs items to become tanky. In that case, because he needs the items, right, he will fall behind quite a lot if he snowball on because his Firaga armor's HP will be too low. So every time he will walk near the fight, you're just gonna lose your Firaga armor. Yeah, so he's kinda in that situational tier right now. Used to be in solid, but in this current meta, he's not that great. So next one, I have Terisla. So Terisla is one of those that I almost put in solid, but in this current assassin meta, right, especially right now, there are a lot of high mobility heroes. He's kind of bad against the high mobility lineups. So similar to Alpha and Xbox, he is much better against low mobility lineups, like a lot better. Against high mobility lineup, he is kind of bad. Similar to Alpha and Xbox, but slower but tankier. Also, he has better AoE than Alpha. So Terisla has better utility than Alpha or Xbox. Also, because of that, he won't fall off as hard if you go behind. He's situational in the sense that he's much better when the enemies are not too mobile. Okay, so next one I have Benedetta. So Benedetta is probably the highest skill floor hero in EXP. He really needs you to have a lot of practice to be really good on her. For most people's skill, right, on Benedetta, she's probably just average. But since I'm rating based on the merits of the hero, based on how good that hero is, I'm gonna put her in situational. Benedetta has decent early game damage. Her wave clear is good enough, but depending on your emblems, she has almost no sustain or weak sustain. Because if you go Fighter, Emblem and Blood Festival on her, she has some sustain but not like fantastic. Her crazy mobility allows her to do a lot of quick rotations right from the start of the game. This is one of the good things. She doesn't have that sustain to stay in lane that much, but because she moves around fast, she can cut lanes, she can clear the lane while the other EXP is not taking care of it and then just rotate. So because of her crazy mobility, right, she will be a very effective split pusher, and she's also very good at reaching the back line. So these are the good things about Benedetta. But her lack of proc control makes her kind of situational, because I think in situations that your team has no proc control, right, picking Benedetta is kind of risky. It's best if your teammates already have CC. So I think situational in the sense that you want to be in a situation that your teammates already have CC. So the next hero is similar to Benedetta. Almost every point that I already mentioned about Benedetta can be applied to the next hero. The next hero is Joy. If you joined my streams before, you know absolute favorite hero in terms of playstyle is Joy. I really like to play Joy. But similar to Benedetta, she has her issues. The reason why I put her better than Benedetta is because she's magic damage. So she counters Wind of Nature. Also, I think her damage is probably more reliable than Benedetta, in the sense that it's easier to hit her skills than Benedetta. And also her dashes are quicker, since Benedetta needs to charge the basic attack dash. That's why I put Joy higher than Benedetta. But similar to Benedetta, she lacks the CC. This is why I put her in situational. The good thing about Benedetta and Joy is that they both rotate extremely fast. Moving on to the mostly solid tier, we have the first hero, Minsita. As you guys said, Minsita could belong to the situational tier, but I think in the current meta where there are so many dash, like almost every meta hero has at least one dash ability, and some even rely on dash like Harif to perform what they want to do. In my opinion, in the current meta, Minsita is mostly solid. Minsita has good early wave clear and sustain, but the thing is that his early wave clear and sustain is all centered around his skill 2, which can be played around, so you have to be careful when you do that skill 2. The good thing about Minsita is that his ult is very high impact, so from level 4 onwards he already has that impact. Yeah, Minsita is especially great in assassin meta, because almost all assassins will be reliant on dashing. Having Minsita in EXP already is a great counter for that, but the thing is that it's not that easy to land a good ult against the mobile heroes. So this is one of the drawbacks, because it's not that easy to land that ult, but if you land it, it is extremely high impact, because the ult has high burst when you combine it with skill 2, and if you go damage build, generally he will be solid when there's enemies that rely heavily on dash. The next hero, Ruby. As we all know, my name is not related to the hero Ruby. My name is coming from a song, so it's not about this hero. But at the same time, I still love playing Ruby. Ruby has a decent wave clear, good sustain, but can be a bit squishy in the early game if you overcommit. So yeah, be careful of that. Similar to Minsita, actually she counters mobile heroes quite a bit. The only difference is that Minsita counters that harder than Ruby. The great thing about Ruby is her consistent CC chain is very annoying. Anybody that played against a Ruby will know that. And also she has great setup potential with flicker hook. I would say Ruby is a very consistent hero. Is impactful throughout the game, no matter which phase. The next hero is highly controversial. It is Sun. I think putting Sun here might make a lot of people flip, but let me talk, okay? Let me talk. Let a brother talk. Recently, Sun was buffed into the stratosphere. He is greatly buffed, like more buffed than any other hero, but still has some of the issues. Sun, skill 3, buffed greatly, now has great damage and slow. He has great one-shot and chase potential, and he's great for split pushing, but he still has a very horrible early game. He still loses heavily to many EXP laners and still lacks heavy crowd control. And he also still is very item dependent. So it is impossible for Sun to reach meta levels because he lacks certain traits that allows a meta EXP to reach that level. In fact, without the buff, Sun should not be at this level. It's just that his damage is so high, he is able to reach this level. So for Sun, right, since he is so item dependent, he will fall behind really hard if he's not at least the same level of farm as your enemy. But in exchange for all these bad things, his late game now is probably the strongest of any EXP laner, which is what makes him get into this tier. So as long as you're not losing too hard by mid game, you already can start making an impact. His late game is extremely good. By mid game, once you get like maybe 3 items, his clones are gonna deal so much damage that you can just send your clone in and then just let your clones do the work. Also, his one-shot potential now is quite insane. I would say his one-shot potential is unfair. In the mid game, once you get like 2 or 3 items, you can probably one-shot almost any squishy that gets in range. Also, his split push is also now actually improved, because if you played soon before this, his Q2 gets interrupted if there is enemy hero in the path, so it will stop at where the enemy hero is. Right now, the skill will just pass through and go to the maximum distance of the dash. So it's much better in split push because you can actually escape a lot better. Yeah, so because of the reasons I stated, Sun is in this ranking now. Okay, next one I have Cho. He got buffed a couple of patches ago. They improved his passive. He has much better early game damage now. His early wave clear is good and he's very mobile, so it allows him to have good early rotations. His base damage is pretty good. You don't really need to go damage build to do good damage. In fact, you don't even need to go any damage items. Just going Thunder Belt with full tank build, he will do a solid amount of damage. One thing that holds Cho back a bit is his lack of sustain. So if you do a lot of trading, you might start to lose in the lane. Yeah, but generally he's good now with high mobility and good crowd control and damage. It's a good mix, which I already said at the start of the video. These are good traits for EXP laner to have, and exactly this is what Cho gives. Also, I want to say that damage Cho can also work. I wouldn't put damage Cho in this tier. This tier's Cho, right, is a tank build Cho. If you want me to rank damage Cho, it will be in situational, not mostly solid. The main reason is that tank Cho can be a lot more proactive than damage Cho. Damage Cho is too squishy to be proactive. He needs to really hide and find targets instead of just being a proactive EXP laner. Next one after Cho is Edith. Okay, so Edith has good wave clear, has 2 great CC skills in her skill 1 and skill 2, and her ultimate is basically the ultimate Uno reverse skill. Just one good ultimate, you can reverse an entire team fight. But the thing is that you need to take damage to charge your passive before you get a solid ultimate. The good thing about Edith is that her entire kit relies on building defense, so it makes her both tanky and also do great damage in her ult. The bad thing about Edith is that her lack of mobility somewhat holds her back. If she is more mobile, right, like maybe her skill 2 can pass through walls, she probably will be meta. But I'm not sure if giving her the ability to skill 2 pass through walls is gonna make her OP. But she can sort of negate that lack of mobility somewhat by using flicker, but it doesn't really help that much in a way. It's more like solving her lack of engage, like a surprise engage at least. Okay, so the next one I have is Glue. So Glue, he has good wave clear, decent sustain, and the thing is that he is really tanky and deals solid damage as long as you don't fall too behind in farm. If you fall behind, it can start feeling like Glue is kind of squishy. His ult is extremely annoying. One thing that is slightly holding Glue back is that he can still be countered with AoE. So in his ult, he can be countered by AoE. But the good thing about Glue is that he can bully other EXP laners if they are not careful. From level 1, you can just keep resetting the skill 1 and lock them down. Yeah, so I put him in mostly solid since he's what I think mostly solid. Next one is CC. So CC is probably the best if you want to go anti-tank in EXP lane. I think she is probably the most consistent if you want to go anti-tank in EXP. Even though Alpha does true damage, but I think CC just feels more consistent because she is a lot more mobile. But the thing about CC is that even if she is not facing a tanky lineup, she would still perform quite well, even without facing a tanky lineup. Whereas for Alpha or Xbox case, they wouldn't do that well, especially when there are enemies that are high mobility and not tanky. This is why she is in mostly solid. In fact, CC against a low mobility tanky lineup would be in this case, like she would be here. Yeah, but generally she is solid. She has great sustain after getting some items like OX and Queen's Wings. Her only drawback I would say is that her wave clear is, I would only consider it decent and not great throughout the game. Like you can't just clear the wave and get moving really fast. It takes a bit of time clearing the wave. So next one I put Alot here. Alot has good wave clear, has good sustain, and has kill pressure from the first minute. So he is fantastic. One of the main drawback is that to do that, he put himself at high risk while doing that. It allows counter plays to happen whenever he goes in. The only thing keeping Alot from being in meta is probably his builds, cause tank build doesn't do enough damage and he's too squishy with a damage build. But otherwise, he's overall super solid as a solo queue EXP. I think he is very close to meta, I would say. On to the meta tier. So for the meta tier, right, I will not mention about wave clear since it's just a basic necessity for meta EXP laner especially. And I also will not mention about damage, sustain or tankiness. Okay, so all of them will have solid damage and will have some form of sustain or tankiness. Okay, so starting off, we have high loss. In general, no hero will be able to force high loss out of his lane. In general, there's no EXP laner is able to force high loss out of his lane. His damage and the tankiness just will not allow that to happen. So if you are new to EXP, you will find it good to start on high loss. And high loss is especially good versus attack speed reliant fighters like Zilong Argus, since his skill 2 reduces the attack speed of whoever it hits over time. Also, his level 4 impact is quite good. He has large AoE out that will slow any enemies in the path, depending on their direction of course, but usually it will be in the right direction. It has quite a good impact, especially against low mobility lineups. I would say high loss is generally will have an impact throughout. Late game, maybe his impact is slightly lowered, but he still will have an impact. So generally, I would say high loss is an extremely solid EXP laner, and I would consider in meta. Also, he can start bullying if he gets a bit of snowball. The next one I have is Gatot. He has great tankiness and sustain, and he combines that tankiness and sustain with solid damage. It is similar to high loss in that it's very difficult to lose lane. His passive allows him to gain high physical defense, because whenever he loses HP, in exchange he gets increased physical defense. So it makes him especially good against lineups that contain a lot of physical damage. Especially will be great against physical marksman. I mean, right now there are a lot of physical marksmen. He's especially good when there is a physical marksman and he has blade armor. His ult is highly impactful and can be used for a large AoE zoning area, but it can be hard to land successfully because of the delay. But if there's another engager on the team, you can time it well and land it more accurately. Generally, just a very solid EXP laner right now. Okay, next one, I have Lucas. Lucas is the newest hero in Mobile Legends, and after playing him for quite a bit, I would say he's actually really good in EXP. He has good sustain, high base damage, so he can build full tank with OX, Thunderbelt and whatever defensive items and still deal a solid amount of damage. His fully charged Q1 also gives him a CC immunity window, whether it's in wolf or human form. One thing I have to say about Lucas though is, from my experience, his skill 2 is kind of bad. I think it's probably the worst dash in Mobile Legends. From my experience, I have never had such a bad experience with a dash. But during his wolf form, actually the dash is extended a bit. It is possible when he's in wolf form. That said, Lucas overall very solid. Can build full tank and still deal a solid amount of damage. You can also go damage build if your team already has enough tankiness. His damage build is quite good, but generally you are gonna go tank build for EXP. Next one, I have Phoveus. For Phoveus, ever since his revamp, he has been in the meta tier. So I don't think I need to explain that much about Phoveus, right? After the revamp, he became a lot more boring. He feels more like a generic fighter. But that said, after the revamp, he is a lot more consistent, because you don't need anybody to dash to activate the ult. So it is a lot more consistent. I think anybody that played against Phoveus will know that this hero is extremely annoying. So he has constant crowd control and he's jumping around, very annoying to deal with. He has solid damage, very tanky, and has sustain as well. So he's really hard to kill without being focused down. To kill a farmed up Phoveus, you're gonna need a lot of people to just smack him. Yeah, so Phoveus, just a high impact hero throughout the game and very extremely solid. So we are at our last 3 heroes. So if you look at the list, right, generally I will place more mobile heroes at the front of their tiers. I value mobility highly and it's extremely important in solo queue. Mobility allows you to clear way faster than you would otherwise, since you reach the way faster, and it also allows you to rotate faster. And the next hero is Hilda. Hilda is super fast in rotation and her sustain is insane thanks to her bush regen passive, which also generates a shield, by the way. It is extremely hard to kill Hilda because firstly she regens, she gets a shield, and then when you want to try to kill her, she just activates Revitalize and just Q1 runs away. It's super annoying. And add to that, early game, I mean, just build full tank and he will still smack you down no matter what. The thing is that a lot of people say that Hilda falls off late game, and I would agree that she falls off somewhat late game, but I think not as much as people think. Like, in my opinion, she doesn't fall off that much, at least for solo queue. For solo queue, the disorganized nature of playing solo, right, allows you to still find the targets to hit. So I think given that she is so effective early and mid and still can be effective in late game, I think she is excellent overall for EXP. Okay, so next I have the much talked about Badang. So Badang has been recently popular, but I have long rated him to be very good. Ever since Thunderbelt release, I already rated Badang quite highly. Even before Thunderbelt was released, I would say that I would consider situational. But after the Thunderbelt release, I would say Badang is already in mostly solid. But recently he got popular, so okay. He's probably the best Thunderbelt stacker in EXP, since his skill 1 lets him stack from range safely. You will usually end up with about 30 to 50 stacks by the end. So that's like 30 to 50 free hybrid defense. He has solid damage even with a full tank build. There was a buff to his ult that doubled his stun duration from 0.6 seconds to 1 second. So it enables him to be a more effective setter than before. He's extremely annoying to deal with because almost everything he does is AoE. Skill 1 is AoE, the AoE knockback. Skill 2 is a AoE knockback plus it creates a wall which blocks off enemy path from escape. His ult is a AoE stun for 1 second. Almost everything he does is AoE. Plus Thunderbelt also has slow, so it's another AoE CC. There is also further stuns from his basic attack if the enemy is near a wall. So if you knock back the enemy into a wall, it also further stuns them. I would say Badang is almost like a Ruby. It's just different but similar. Also, he's similar to Ruby. He's a fairly solid counter to Fanny. It's not like the best counter, but at least that's something. Yeah, so ever since the buff, I would say it launched him into the meta tier. Okay, last one, of course, we have Khalid. Khalid is super strong early game, probably one of the strongest in EXP lane. He clears fast. His passive, which increases his movement speed, allows for super fast rotation. So it's like almost like Hilda on steroids, because Hilda still needs to cast skill 1, but Khalid just walks and gets extra movement speed. Plus his enhanced basic attack also allows him to, it's like a free dash. His skill 1 has solid damage even with a full tank build. He has crazy sustain in middle of fights with skill 2, because his skill 2 gives damage reduction and healing, but you have to be careful when you cast your skill 2 in the middle, because any stun will interrupt the skill 2. You have to be careful about casting the skill 2 in the middle of fights. His engage with the ult is solid, and you can combine it with flicker for extra surprise. Khalid extremely solid, can build full tank and still have great damage, and I would say Khalid has high impact throughout the game, but especially in the early game, thanks to his super fast rotation and damage. Soon is a meta now. I see a lot of Soon in ranked game, even Elgin said it. I would say very simply, the popularity of a hero doesn't mean that it's very good. It just means the hero is very popular. That is all. If I consider popularity of heroes, right, this list will be extremely different. So I never consider a popularity of a hero. Finally, we are done with the list. So this is my personal EXP lane solo queue tier list. Just another quick mention that the heroes listed to the left does not mean that they are always better than anything on the right. It just means that they are generally better in more situations. So it doesn't mean that Khalid is always better than Hylos, and picking Hylos over Khalid means you're trolling. It just means that they are generally better in more situations. That's all. So let me know your thoughts on the tier list. Do you agree or disagree? Leave it down in the comments below. Thank you.